So you start out in the high chair. Eventually, hopefully, you get to another kind of chair that's called a recliner. And you hope to avoid one that's called electric your whole life through, okay? That's kind of the goal, but that's a chair. Now, with chairs, we often put them with things called tables. Perhaps you have a set of these in your home, okay? Tables and chairs. In my particular home, we have tables and chairs. That's where we typically sit to eat a meal, all right? And as a result of having tables and chairs, we have come up with a phrase in our society, in our culture, that maybe you use at your house. We often say that it's time to take your seat at the table, okay? And that phrase, seat at the table, has become something much larger in our society than just sitting down for dinner, right? It's that idea that somehow because of who we are, what we've accomplished, what we've done, our resume, whatever, that we can have a seat at the table, right? It's that idea that maybe even in your professional career, in your business life, you've wanted a seat at the table. That's where the decision makers are. Or in some other area, maybe it's on a board or something, you've been offered a seat at the table, okay? That's something of significance. Sometimes it's a rite of passage. I first learned of this in the Fowler family growing up during Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays when we would have big meals and the family would come over. And there was never enough seats at the table, otherwise known as the adult table, right? So most of my growing up years was spent at the kid table, all right? Now, the kid table's fine until you become of a certain age, like 12, when you no longer feel like you're a kid anymore, all right? When you're 12 or 13 and your little 4-year-old cousin Mitch is making life miserable at the kids' table, you want to get to the adult table. You want a seat at that table. And I remember when I finally got there, finally graduated, I was like 21. And I got to sit at the adult table. And what is true with most of us, if you're anything like, I got to the adult table and realized this is really boring. I want to go back to the kids' table, all right? But it was a rite of passage. I got a seat at the table, okay? And we think like that a lot in our current culture and society, that phrase of having a seat at the table. Because in our culture and our society, we're often spending a lot of time thinking about building a case for legitimizing ourselves to get to a certain spot, right? We're measured. We have to have certain performance things that we qualify for to get to that next seat at the next table, right? This is all throughout our culture. And so it's interesting that when it comes to the idea of a seat at the table, oftentimes because of the way we are trained to think, it becomes very difficult to completely grasp this thing called grace. Because it's very easy for a grace concept to get, a little distorted by the way that we think about arriving at a seat at the table. And that's where Jesus just turns his seat at the table thing totally on end. I'm going to read to you in just a couple minutes a story out of Luke chapter 14, but I want to set this up for you. All right, so the author of Luke has Jesus seated at a dinner party in the home of a leader of the Pharisees, okay? Now, let's just review a little bit. To be a Pharisee, it was a part of Jewish tradition whereby it was a system that you followed all of the religious rules, all of the guidelines and all the restrictions, and the better you were at following them, the more legit you were, okay? The more righteous you were, the more holy you were, okay? And it was that idea that if you could follow that whole system, you deserved to have a seat at the table in the kingdom of God because you had earned it. You were there. And so Jesus is sitting at a dinner party in the home of a leader of the Pharisees, somebody who does this better than everyone else. And around the table are several guests who think that exact same way, that it's by what you do that gives you a seat. Okay? So Luke sets it up, and here's how this begins. They bring in a guy who's got some sort of physical affliction. This is the Sabbath day, all right? Pharisees have very big rules about the Sabbath day, and this guy's in front of him, and Jesus asks everybody at the dinner table, well, what should I do? Is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? Nobody says anything, because when Jesus asks questions, people get awfully quiet. All right? So Jesus heals him. then proceeds to launch into a big, long speech to all of the guests at the table, because he notices that when they all sat down, they were all jockeying for a position. Because you see, there's certain spots at the table that are more prominent than others. And he gives them a lecture on where they should sit. Lastly, he turns to the host, the Pharisee leader, and looks at him and says, look, next time you throw one of these things, don't invite all of these people. Okay? Bring the misfits in town. Beat all the people who can't repay the favor to you. Bring them in. That would be a blessing for you. So it's really interesting that in just a few short verses, Jesus at this dinner party has done something that Pharisees would never do and heal a guy, insulted all the guests and insulted the host. Now, I've always told people that if you want to make a dinner party really weird, invite a pastor. There is nothing that makes a dinner party more weird than inviting a minister type, okay? So, hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam. I'm Alan.
Alan, nice to meet you. What do you do?
I'm a minister.
Oh, boy. You expect someone to say architect. You can deal with teacher. You can have all sorts of conversation, even around dry cleaning, okay? But when somebody says, I'm a minister, you see it in their eyes. They just freeze. They just freeze because they don't know what to say. I had this happen once. I was at a dinner party. Lady said, I'm Julie. I said, I'm Sam. Julie said, what do you do? I said, I'm a minister. She just looked at me. And I'm like, what? And she said, so is God speaking to you about me right now? And because I'm a little like this, I said, yeah, totally. All right? It's just weird. But if you want to make a dinner party downright awkward and really interesting, invite Jesus. Okay? So this is where we pick up the story. All right, right here. It's awkward silence in the room. Healed someone, insulted the guests, insulted the hosts. Awkward silence. And every time there's a room with awkward silence, there's always that one person who's got to break the ice. So here's what this genius says. That triggered a response from one of the guests. How fortunate the one who gets to eat dinner in God's kingdom. You can imagine this guy saying this, holding up a glass. How fortunate the one who gets to eat dinner in God's kingdom. Yeah, true. But the problem is the guy is saying this because he fully believes that he and everyone else at this table deserves a seat at the table of the kingdom of God because of what they've done and what they've accomplished. He's missing the point completely that Jesus has been trying to make throughout dinner. It's not by what you have done. And so Jesus has to launch into a story that is absolutely ludicrous. Let me read it to you. Jesus followed this up. It says, okay, for there once was a man who threw a great dinner party and invited many. When it was time for dinner, he sent out his servant to the invited guests, saying, come on in, the food's on the table. They all began to beg off, one after another, making excuses. The first one said, I bought a piece of property and I need to go look it over. Please send my regrets. Another said, I just bought 5 teams of oxen and I really need to go check them out. Send my regrets. And yet another said, I just got married and need to go home to my wife. Oldest excuse in the book. The servant went back and told the master what had happened. He was outraged and told the servant, quickly, go out into the city streets and alleys. Collect all who look like they need a square meal, all the misfits and homeless and wretched you can lay your hands on, and bring them here. The servant reported back, Master, I did what you commanded, and there's still room. The master said, then go to the country roads. Whoever you find, drag them in. I want my house full. Let me tell you, not one of these originally invited is going to get so much as a bite at my dinner party. You thought there was awkward silence before. Think of that. Now, just make sure we all are kind of on the same page here. Everyone at that dinner party would completely understand that the tale that Jesus is telling would never happen. Because back in that day, before things like refrigeration and ice boxes and freezers, okay? If you threw a dinner party, you had the date set, you had already sent out the RSVPs, and if you were somebody who got an invitation and RSVP'd, there's no way you're not showing, okay? Because dinner parties were planned to the person. They knew exactly how many people were coming because you had to go out back and start, killing off the livestock. You don't just do that because you think between 25 and 50 may show. This is your income. This is your life. So if you throw this, it's a big deal. So they had it down to the chicken, down to the duck, down to the sheep. They knew exactly how much they needed for the dinner. So if you RSVP'd, you are not making an excuse that you can't be there. It's the biggest event you might go to all year. Plus, you don't have to cook dinner. That's big. And so people are sitting around that table with Jesus. Understand, this is ludicrous. You would never, ever not show up to a seat that has been offered you at the table. And the point that Jesus makes is a very subtle one, but a very powerful one. In the same way that it's ludicrous to think that you deserve a seat at God's table because of what you've done, as ludicrous as it is to think that you would ever refuse something that you think is rightfully yours, as crazy as that is, you would never, ever get to enter the kingdom of God or have a seat at the table because of your resume. Your title can't get you there. Your accomplishments, your ledger, your scorecard can't get you there. We get a seat at the table in God's kingdom not because of what we've done, but because of who God is. Sometimes that's still hard to fathom for me. And maybe it is for you. I don't know how long you've been following Jesus. I've been trying to follow Jesus for a while, but sometimes I still get caught up in the whole resume. It's legit for me to have a seat at the table. That's not how it works. God offers it freely. Everyone's invited. You don't have to be a Pharisee who followed all of the rules and got it all right. In fact, if you tend to think that way, it doesn't get you in. If you think the other way, you think, well, I'll never deserve that. Look at all the things I've done. Man, if everybody knew that, they'd never allow me a seat at the table, especially God. I got to tell you, that's just not true either. This seat that God has made a way for us to have is grace calling us. It's simply by grace alone that we've been offered a seat at the table. That's the best news I've ever heard. Because it reminds me, even today, this morning, that there's nothing I can do to make God love me more, and there's nothing I can do to make God love me less. There is a seat at God's table for you and I. So what's interesting is, in just a few minutes here, Alan's going to take us and show us what's for supper at that particular table. But there's only one decision that we have left to make this morning. And it's something that we arrive at often when we come in gatherings like this called a worship service. We arrive at this place, and all we have to do is choose whether or not we want to accept the invitation for the seat that God has prepared for you and me. Alan, take us to supper.